The next third chapter or song of Vimachandra from among his texts, the Union of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, starts with an expression of compassion and concern, in which he says, well, roughly translated, one would say, alas, oh no, please don't, oh my, that kind of thing, which you would cry out if you see a great calamity, or if you see a great suffering, if there would give rise to your compassion. This would be the kind of utterance that he would make. And why does he utter these words? Because he continues to say, the world will be destroyed by fire and water. When he speaks about the world, this pertains to the classical worldview of being the Mount Meru in the center, surrounded by the 8 continents, by the 4 continents and the 8 subcontinents, etc., and so forth. The entire outer world, as it is being imagined according to ancient Indian cosmology. This outer world, which we know is the world in which we live in, will indeed eventually be destroyed. After ages, after eons, this world system as we know it will be destroyed by fire, by water, by storms, and the inevitable result of such destruction is that the world as we know it, the world which we presently perceive, the world which we live in, will just not be existent anymore, will have fallen prey to utter destruction. I forgot to say before that since the world will eventually be destroyed by all of these elemental forces, it is clear that even though it may seem so durable, there's no durability, there's no permanence to it whatsoever. So all of this which we perceive as the outer world is highly perishable, highly impermanent. And Vimachandra then goes on to say, even years are impermanent. Each year passes away one after another. As we all very well know from our own experience, year goes by, year after year, one develops into the next, etc., and so forth. Even at this particular place here, we've come here together for the 10th anniversary of the 10th summer course. It's been 10 years that this center here has been established. This is the 10th summer course that we're attending, and in this way already 10 years have gone by. And if that in itself is not enough to exemplify the passing of time, just look at yourselves. You might remember your childhood, your infancy, your childhood. You have grown up and you have grown older in years, year by year, and now you find yourself here. So without having to go into any further detail concerning this, it is clear that years go by one after the other, and in this way also impermanence is proven.
and the Tambu Sashi or True Young Sundawa, and then Shantum Metoloma the young body young Andoa. And then Yaka the Yigis or Yaka on the Yankees. They are the two and Metal Doloma, Sergeant on the you cut them on the cut down for it. At the end of the door, the Yigila, Tenga let the Bang County Sebori, and the Shen County, the Loma Sebori in the coal, and the little door. The Yigis of the Ganga, Ganga to Tanda, and Gangi, Gama Semboyang, Shen County, Roma County, Masala, then our Lingua. At the Yigala, any Roa, Castle, Romo, Castle, Tramu, and the Tramu with the Jordan. That was a
Not only the years are impermanent, even the seasons do not last. And accordingly, Vimachandra says, the 4 seasons, heat and cold, the color of the ground, they all do change. We have experienced this for ourselves many times. In the springtime, when the year begins, everything gets underway, everything starts to bloom, everything starts to sprout, everything is hopeful, beautiful, nice and shiny. And the springtime then eventually changes into summer. In summer, everything is in full bloom, everything is green, and the vegetation, flowers, etc., everything is very colorful, everything is very enjoyable, only to eventually change into the season of autumn, in which slowly the leaves on the trees, etc., change their color from green to red, and then eventually to yellow, and eventually also start falling down, and before we know it, winter is upon us. Everything will have dried up, everything will have turned brown, grey, and maybe even snow starts to fall, covering everything in snow, covering everything in ice, and everything is cold and rather unenjoyable. So in this way, the seasons do change constantly. While one day we experience intense heat, the next day we shiver with cold. Even the color of the ground has changed completely. So this shows us quite clearly what all of this impermanence is truly about. There's constant change even within the seasons. There's not any durability whatsoever to it. Even during the course of a single day, we can see the signs of impermanence very clearly, unmistakably, if we were only to look. Accordingly, Vimachandra says, the sun rises, and as it moves from the east to the west, time continues to pass. During any day, the morning time, 5-ish or 6-ish, whatever it might be, the sun, for the most part, rises and begins its journey across the sky. Presently, for instance, we've come here together around 10 o'clock, now it's going on 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock is not far off, and the sun will be at its highest point very soon, only to set again after that, slowly, until eventually it will disappear in the west. And it is exactly like this with our own lives. Our own lives, they have begun at a certain time, and it will end at another time. It goes by moment by moment. There's no way of stopping it whatsoever. So in this way, also, even in the course of a single day, impermanence is clearly demonstrated.
당하는 거 다 쟁여요, 제 동안. 다 대지 개백 동안 내가 다 개백 동안에 rinpoche도 로den도 사지 다 주고라 내가 이게 무통 안쪽에 무슨 제자지 그나야 야부시 무통 안 로그나는 좀 무통 다 된다와지 개백 동안 하고요.
Vimachandra's last line in this particular verse goes, "The beings of this world are born, age, fall sick, and die." And we, for ourselves, have exactly undergone the same thing many times. For beings to come into this world, be they humans or animals or any other sort of beings for that matter, they first need to be born. And then their life unfolds and they undergo all sorts of experiences, many sufferings, for the most part, and their life will then eventually go by again. All of us, of course, without having to say it, have been born. We do not remember the suffering of birth, but if we were able to remember, or if we were to watch a birth, we would clearly see that the process of being born, of giving birth, the concept of being born for the being that comes into this world is a very painful one. Even though we do not remember it, this suffering clearly at a certain time has been experienced by us. Then as we're born, from the very day that we have been born, we start to age. First we might find ourselves in possession of all of our faculties and senses, etc., and so forth, and things might just be very nice, but then eventually the power of our senses starts to fail. We age, and this is being experienced in all sorts of ways. Our eyesight, that heretofore has been extremely keen, may all of a sudden start to fail. Our hearing may not be what it once was. We might not even be able to utter, to express ourselves properly anymore. Of course, the power of speech eventually fails, and the moment will come, at least for some, where they're not even able to carry their own bodies out of their own strength anymore. Difficulties to walk, etc., and so forth. So in this way, clearly, the process of aging is upon us, which yet again, of course, is a sign of impermanence at work. So as if all of this aging business weren't enough, there also the suffering of sickness. Rinpoche added after his first bit, presently we're not really concerned about it. Presently we're all nice and well, and we have all of our faculties together. But just wait, the day will be upon us eventually. So, going along hand in hand with all of this aging of ours, also the suffering of sickness will clearly make itself felt. At the moment, this particular moment, we may not have any trouble of such sort whatsoever. But then eventually, as the years go by, the one or other sickness will clearly avail itself of ourselves. And then we suffer through all sorts of pains, etc. And we take all sorts of medicines in our hope to be able to eradicate this pain or this sickness. And once all the various medicaments that we might have prescribed to ourselves don't work anymore, then we go to a doctor and we hope that the doctor can fix it. For the most part that often happens, but then the day will also be upon us when we once again go to the doctors and instead of just giving us a prescription and sending us home again, the doctor will say, no, you have to go to the hospital, you have to be checked out. And as we go to the hospital, hoping to get a good report after all of these examinations and hoping to be able to go home again, then one day eventually the doctors in the hospital will tell us, no, you're not going home, you're here to stay because you have a really bad sickness. At that moment fear grips us, where for the time being we've only been mildly inconvenienced by all of these examinations we had to undergo and this diffuse pain that we've been feeling. All of a sudden the idea of our own perishability is very clearly upon us. We're being told we have a bad sickness, we have to stay in hospital, and our heart is gripped with fear. It starts beating wildly, and there's nothing to be done but to lie down in the hospital beds and suffer through whatever the doctors have in store for you. Then, eventually, if we're lucky, that is, this sickness will abate, and we deem ourselves lucky to be able to go home again now and go about our daily business, when, after a while, the next sickness comes along. That might take very much the same course as before, and once that is treated, yet another one comes along. So sickness follows after sickness, and there's just no peace of mind anymore because we're constantly suffering of something, we're constantly in pain, we're constantly miserable, way beyond being simply inconvenienced. It might even come to such a point that we might not be able to eat properly anymore, we might not be able to drink properly anymore, we might not be able to sleep anymore, and to wake up in the morning being refreshed from our sleep. So everything turns on a rather more somber hue, everything turns on a rather more miserable turn. And that is the suffering of sickness, which on top of all of that aging business is invariably upon us. But then, luckily we have doctors like Christoph and new faces like that.
아니 나사제 도루 내니 아니 다가 라부도아 아니 나사 캔서리 장가 찹사루 아니나 너가 어제 나고리 생각을 다 타도 많이 저기 나랑 생통도 지조 용근도 생조와 용근도 옛날에 다 타도 많이 아니 좋아요
However we might have managed to get from one sickness to the next and through them, eventually it could by all means happen that we hear a truly bad news from the doctors. For instance, we find ourselves in the hospital again and again. We have been examined from top to bottom and back again, and then the doctors tell us the sad news that well, no matter what we can do, no matter what we can say, it is a terminal disease. It is cancer, for instance. The cancer has spread already all over the body. There is nothing to be done about it. Your time is up, and we are at the end of our wits.
Anita, 저를 잡을 나랑 요 배가 나서봐 몽고 용기 정지 대라 대서 현적인 거예요. 옛날에 지금까지 요 보시는 강 옛날에 한번 현적장 제요만 현적들이 타라토르게 적지 현적장이 빵 대연도 나랑 현적도 나랑 저 배가 쓰는 칼콩과 통지 되는 장례 공조선 벌와이 되는 랜저를 썼던 제법.
Now clearly, one day, sooner or later, death would definitely be upon us, no way around it. And when that finally is the case, when our life has run its course, then at this particular moment we ought to think about what we do with this final satisfied with the last bit of time that we have at our disposal. By all means, there are such people who are rather well-to-do, who are rather affluent, who have all sorts of possessions, houses, wealth, money in the bank, and all sorts of enjoyable possessions, etc., and so forth. But clearly, when death is upon you, none of that is of any help whatsoever. None of this could possibly be of any avail. Therefore, it would make a great deal of sense that when it is clear that you have to go anyway, to rid yourself of all of that stuff. Rid yourself of it in such a way that even your clinging to all of these possessions is gone. Because, let it be said quite clearly, particularly for those who are affluent in such a way, who have all such possessions, they often cling to them very much, and clinging to all of the possessions, which invariably you will have to leave behind bit by bit. There's not a single little piece of all of this stuff that you could possibly take with you when you die. Clinging to all of this actually becomes a hindrance, becomes an obstacle to liberation. Therefore, when it has become crystal clear to you that death will come, and even come rather soon, train yourself in letting go of all of these things. Train yourself in giving them away, offering them to the three rare and precious ones, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Give them away to the needy. The best thing to practice once death is upon you, whether you have lots of possessions or not so many, would be to train yourself in the practice of mandala offering, giving away whatever it is that you have in the form of a mandala offering, so as to accumulate some more merit which will be useful for the journey that you have to embark upon. When the fear of death and death itself is clearly upon us, it would serve us well to train ourselves, or to remind ourselves a little bit of the fact that we are not alone in this at all. We should remind ourselves of the fact that innumerable beings eventually will face the very same situation. Actually, all beings will eventually face the same situation. And they may, just like us, undergo all sorts of sufferings and pains. They may be greatly afraid of death that is upon themselves. And we might remind ourselves in such a moment of the suffering of others. Remind yourself of the fact that not only you yourself are suffering through this at this particular moment, but that this suffering is in store for each and every single being, not a single one excluded eventually. At this particular point, you could remind yourselves of the instructions that you have received, for instance, the instructions of how to do the practice of taking and of sending and taking, the practice that is commonly known as Tonglen. And you could apply the practice in such a way as to think, since death will eventually be upon all beings, and the fear of death, etc., and so forth, may they be free of this, may they eventually become free of this and the causes thereof, and may all of this come to fruition within myself, where may all of this be absorbed into myself, so that all other beings, not a single one excluded, may become free of such fear, may become free of such suffering. So that would be an extremely advisable practice to train in once the moment is clearly upon us. A very useful practice at this particular point, particularly when death is close, would be to address oneself to one's own root teacher, to imagine him above one's head in the shape of the Buddha Amitabha. So in this way you would imagine Amitabha to sit above your head, but you would consider him to be essentially none other but your root teacher. Or if you would have trained yourself throughout your life in the recognition of mind nature, resting in the recognition of mind nature, that would also be a very advisable practice at this moment. For that matter, there are many other practices which one could possibly have trained oneself in. There might be other practitioners who have spent many years practicing Chenrezig, the great compassionate one, or practicing Tara, or any other deity, any other human deity for that matter. You would invariably imagine that deity above your head, but always remind yourself of the fact that essentially the deity which appears in its particular shape is none other but your root teacher. And then pray to the very bottom, from the very bottom of your heart to the root teacher in the shape of Amitabha or Chenrezig or whatever other Vidam deity, whatever other shape you would choose. You would concentrate on the heart region of the deity, which is none other but your teacher, and pray from the bottom of your heart one-pointedly to them. Another practice that could be employed at this particular time, if you have received instructions, if you're trained in this practice, is the practice of the transference of consciousness, which is commonly known as Poa. So there are various different practices of such types which it would be very advisable to concentrate upon once death is truly upon you. Sherab continues to say in this next verse, the changes of impermanence are like ripples on water, and all things that seemingly exist are not composite, are not permanent at all. This is one of the traditional analogies that is being used, the movement of water, which never stands still, which always moves in a certain way, flowing from here to there, or being moved by the wind so that there appear ripples on the water, as is actually said in the first line. This is a traditional analogy for things being permanently, things changing changing all the time, being utterly impermanent. So among all of these appearances and phenomena that we might perceive, there is not a single one that has any durability to it, any permanence to it. All of these various appearances, phenomena, things, whatever you might call them, are constantly changing, constantly shifting their shape. They are impermanent at all times. Accordingly, Vimachandra also says, amongst all that is composite, having existence as things, it is impossible that even one of them will remain forever. It really says that whatever it is that we perceive around ourselves, all of these appearances, phenomena, etc., and so forth, are constantly changing and are perishable and impermanent. On the other hand, we also have heard of the great many beings who have practiced, particularly the meditation of Chakra in ancient times in India. Rinpoche was telling about such stories yesterday. We heard in the course of the Chakra empowerment about some of them. And in particular, there was the Master Luipa, who, as we have heard yesterday, settled himself down at the shores of the ocean, and from many years when he practiced Chakra unpointedly, he lived of nothing else but fish intestines, which had been thrown away by the fishermen. In the course of his practice, he achieved great realization and accomplishments by way of focusing fully on that particular Chakra practice.
Anytime, that also that woman sent that to us. I did not get and enjoy the past. I didn't do it that also woman sent it in it.
At that particular time, somewhere in the south of India, there was a kingdom which was headed by the king Vimachandra. And at a certain time, it became clear to Luipa that this king was among his major future students. So eventually he traveled down there to meet that king.
And then it got up and I sent it in and that was in that chapel. I think you met okay and I know that and I did any I knew my dear and in that was I didn't February. The Tambo Lambo Sony and then Lapa Metal and Metal with Chimbo and the Connie. I Lambo Sony and I had you. Dig along God and
so when Luipa came to that place, it was at the time of the preparation of the king's birthday celebrations. The gardens around the palace were being decorated and lots of guests had been invited. And it fell to the 32 main ministers of the king to, before the king appeared, prepare the king's seat so that amongst all of his followers, his ministers and courtiers, etc., he could then celebrate the birthday. So as they were then walking towards that particular spot, the ministers, all of them with beautiful flowers in their hands, about to prepare the king's throne, to prepare the reception of the king who was about to arrive. As they were walking one after the other down the path, they came upon that person. There was that rather strange-looking fellow who was sitting halfway, lying, lounging in the middle of the path, who of course was none other but our master, the Luipa.
and then what I cannot pass on long one the yellow pebble is he called cat and town did it. And then when he is some lap and some parting of this. Then not to do the town parting and then things of your man. And then he might have called, ha ha ha. Jim was getting one. Then was the draw that. The kind and so. Because they're trying to.
So as the ministers came upon that rather strange person, they were somewhat inconvenienced because he was just in the way. He had to go. They were on important business, and the king was due to arrive soon. So that stranger, he just did not fit the picture, and they told him, "Get out of the way. Get yourself out of here. You have to make space on this path here." But this person wouldn't do anything, he would not react in any which way. He just sat there and looked at him and paid no attention to them whatsoever. Until some of the ministers thought, okay, then just shove him out of the way. So two ministers set down their flowers and they grabbed him by his hands and they tried to pull him away, which of course didn't work. And then several other ministers joined in and they were pulling and shoving and trying their best, and nothing worked at all, because this strange person was unbelievably heavy. He wouldn't budge a centimeter. They could not move him at all. And as they were so getting ever more concerned to get him out of the way, of course time was getting shorter and shorter, on top of this strange person, he would start to laugh. He laughed at them in such a way that poor ministers even got very afraid. The blood in their veins all of a sudden ran every which way, but not the way it should, and they were greatly afraid of that very strange person which could not be moved in any which way, and even had the guts to laugh at her.
And it never done the yours on the Jabu like you are. I remember then the Jambo in those Jambo absolutely. I think a long garden the Zan goes and go like Jambo Shan is a true, no, just a long Jambo, a long mom, Cheryl Song, Jack Cotton down foot. Just a mom was a bit Jambo upon my back, you see. And that was the mom down in my head. And Dragon sent a mom couldn't everyone. And one done the Lila, and Luipa, ha ha, there's a mom comes to gang and nobody, ha ha, hey, ha, hey, gang and nobody in the truth.
So the good ministers, rather unamused, figured what to do. Can't move the guy a single little bit. But we have to continue with the preparation of the celebration, so that doesn't do at all. So they hurried back to the king and told the king about it. The king heard about this strange person who was greatly disturbing the preparations for his birthday, and he got rather mad. He said, what on earth? Send the army, send them in and have them cut this person into pieces. So the army, as they want to do, followed orders. Off they went with lots of swords and spears and all sorts of weapons at their disposal, and they descended upon Luipa, who simply continued to sit there and to laugh away, ha ha, he, and was not impressed at all by this display of the army. The effect of his laughing this way was, however, instantly that all the soldiers turned utterly mad. They were running to and fro like all sorts of madmen, themselves going ha ha, he, all over the place, and it was utter bedlam, it was utter confusion, and they did just about everything, not just what they were told. So in this way, again, they were completely unable to move Luipa.
And that moment, I'm going to the first on the devil if you are. I think that the Turkish in there, or Trot of there was in I'm not going in, and then long with Shan, dancing, don't do. Those are something, and cut level something, and cut second line. And then, look at the lad, and go on with it, and hot. And then, the lad, look at so in there. Not Jabu in it. Jabu, so in it. Not Jabu in it.
So the news was eventually brought to the king that his army had descended into utter madness. They were all jumping all over the place, just laughing stupidly, not doing at all what they were told. And it dawned upon him that this must be a rather special person. He thought to himself, someone who's able to do that must be one of these greatly accomplished beings, one of these Mahasiddhas. So I had better go check for myself. So the king, as befits a king, then got up onto his elephant, and all sorts of servants were called in to precede him and walk after him with umbrellas and banners and pennons, etc., and so forth. And in this way, he slowly made his way down to the park where Luipa was sitting among all of his scene. Then he addressed Luipa, and he asked him, "Who are you?" Luipa said, "I'm the king." And he asked the king back, he said, "And who are you?" And the king got down from his elephant and said, No, I'm the king. So far.
And then Jabu get tried. So Jabu and Jasi can use it. That Jabu called some more. So Jabu and Jasi can use it. Not Jasi, not such a good narrow thing. You might go down and narrow rolling. Long several you want to then look happy. 나랑 세우고 동반이가 되는 나랑 스무이. 그러니 생긴 몸도 내 나랑 거리.
So the king, naturally somewhat taken aback, asked him, "Well, if you're the king, then where is your kingdom? Show me your kingdom." And Luipa replied, "Well, this great earth upon which I rest. There's my seat, it's my throne. The sun and the moon are my lights. The wind is my fan, and the fact and my ungraspable mind nature is my queen. The sky is my umbrella, and all beings that you see all over the place here, they are my subjects. Such is my kingdom. Clearly impressed with this demonstration of Luipa's, the replies of Luipa's, the king then realized that indeed this person must be one of those who were known as Mahasiddhis, greatly accomplished beings. And having realized that this is the case, he and his ministers prostrated to Luipa, circumambulated him many times, and they requested him, they asked him, please accept us, take us on as your students, to which Luipa said, okay. And he then proceeded to initiate them into the tantras of Chakrasamvara. He explained all the various tantras and commentaries on the tantras to them. He gave them all the liberating, profound instructions and introduced them thoroughly into the practice of Chakrasamvara. In this way, the king and his ministers practiced Chakrasamvara for a long duration of time, and eventually they achieved accomplishment themselves. And it is said that from among this group of practitioners, the king eventually became known as the Master Darikapa, whereas one of his ministers, who also achieved accomplishment, became known as the Master Dekipapa. Usually we would meditate a few minutes together and then there would be a little time for questions, but time is up for now, so we'll keep this for the afternoon session. Let us now conclude this present session with the dedication of merit for the sake of beings.